All right, number 39, refer to the following graphs to determine an appropriate response. Which one is the graph of y equals, oh, and you know what I noticed? It has erased my little symbols here for the greatest integer. So which one is the graph of y equals the greatest integer function? All right, and what is the value of y when x equals 2.5? If you have a copy of the textbook, a physical copy of the textbook, I would recommend flipping to the back inside cover, and there you will find a series of different graphs for functions, and many of these we're going to study throughout this semester, but you'll quickly be able to see that graph C is the graph of the greatest integer function. And without getting into how this is graphed specifically, let's just talk about what happens with the greatest integer function, and to do that we can find out what the value of y is when x equals 2.5. All right, so y equals the greatest integer function, and we're going to plug in 2.5. So what is the greatest integer function? Well, here's the definition. For all real numbers x, the greatest integer function returns the largest integer less than or equal to x. All right, so we take some number, in this case 2.5, and we plug it into the function, and now we want to know, what do we get out? Well, if we put in an integer, and recall an integer is just some number without a fractional part, then we're going to get out that same integer. So, for example, if we take the integer, let's say 2, plug it in, because 2 is an integer, we get out 2. All right, if we were to take the integer 11, plug it in, because 11 is an integer, we get out 11. If, for example, we take negative, 6, plug it in, because negative 6 is an integer, it doesn't have any fractional parts, any decimal parts, then we get out negative 6. The fun comes in when we plug in some number that is not an integer, meaning a number that has a fractional or decimal part. 2.5 certainly fits that description, right? It has a fractional part, a decimal part, and when you plug in a number with a decimal or a fractional part, what the greatest integer function does is it really rounds down to the largest integer less than this number, the number you plug in. So what is the largest number largest integer less than 2.5? Well, that would be 2, wouldn't it? Because we're rounding down. So what is the value of y when x is 2.5? Well, that's just 2. But let's look at a couple more just to help us understand better. What if we plug in, how about 7.9? 7.9, definitely not an integer because we have this 0.9 decimal, this fractional part. So when we plug in 7.9, we're going to get out the largest integer less than 7.9. And the largest integer less than 7.9 is 7. We round down. All right, how about, let's look at a negative. Negatives can be tricky. How about like negative 8.7? Well, negative 8.7, definitely not an integer, right? It has a fractional part, a decimal part. So we're going to get out the largest integer less than negative 8.7. And with negatives, you've got to be careful because your first instinct might be to round to negative 8, right? Because that's what we would do if it was positive. But we're rounding to the largest integer less than negative 8.7, in which case we're rounding to negative 9. So with negatives, when we say that we're rounding down, that means we've got to be careful which direction we're moving. All right, so there's number 39. The graph C is our greatest integer function, and when we plug in 2.5, we're going to get out 2.